Recently, I shared a video on a workflow that I created that takes care of collecting the body measurements for a fitness coach's clients. In that video, I gave an overview of how the clients submit their body measurements into the system, from where they get added into the database, and then how the coach checks the tracker to take an understanding of how each of our clients is progressing in terms of their fitness goals. This entire process is automated, so once the system is set up, nobody has to do any manual task except for the clients who have to submit their body measurements on a weekly basis. Obviously, that video is good for someone who has basic understanding of how Airtable works, so they can take the idea and use that to build their own workflow. But if you're someone who would like to go a little deeper and learn it in a step-by-step process so that you can implement the learnings from a real life case study, then this video is for you. If you would like to discuss your project with me on a free 30-minute consultation call, then I'll leave a link in the description where you can reach out to me. In the mentioned video, I created a client ID to be sent to each client, which they would use to fill in their measurements for us to group their entries by that client ID. Because at the time of setup of that system, sending of pre-filled forms and hidden pre-filled forms were not possible. And I'm not even sure if it was possible to link the submitted measurement records to their respective enrollments in any other way. In this setup, we don't really need any client ID. So we go like this. We require only two tables to implement this. We can name the first table as program enrollments. Actually, in my client's database, it's called payment details because this table holds payments as well as program specific details. But for the demo, program enrollment seems most appropriate. So I'll name it like that. And another table called body measurements tracker, which is going to receive and store fitness clients' weekly body measurements. To speed up the process, I have already created these fields in the table. Now let's create some sample records in this. I added two program enrollments. So let me also create a connection between these two tables. I'll add a new field called body measurements. And each of the records from program enrollment will be linked to one or more body measurements so that we can tell whose body measurements is whose. And I'll keep this toggled on that allows the connection to multiple body measurements from this table. For your information throughout this video, I'll be using the words client, enrollment, program interchangeably, but they all mean a record from this table called program enrollment. Now the clients who would be submitting their body measurements need a place where they can fill in their details. So we can use this form view to create a form which they can access publicly and submit their entries. I can also check quickly which fields from the table I want on this form. And if I don't want some fields to be shown, then I can remove them. In this case, I'll be removing this program details field from this form, and I'll tell you why. But for now, let's leave this field as it is and let's see how it works. When the clients will get this public link to submit their entries, for this field that's on this form, all other program enrollments belonging to our database are also going to get shown. That is, any client can see all other clients on our database, and that creates a confidentiality issue. This is not how I want this form to work. So let's just submit this form anyway. So that submitted our client one's body measurement, and we can see that in the database with the connection already established with the respective enrollment. But we'll use a workaround to create a connection with the relevant enrollment without showing this field that reveals all other clients from the database. Now let's see how we can use a workaround to create a connection automatically without compromising on the confidentiality. To identify the respective enrollment, I want to create a simple text field where I can add a record ID from the enrollment. This record ID will be the ID of the enrollment record that sits in this table. To give it a little personalization, I will also add a text field for name, and each client can even see their name already filled into the form when they open it. How can we do that? Not too recently, Airtable released a feature called prefilled forms. So we can prefill some of the form fields by manually building the URL with the prefilled data. Now let's open this form URL and see how we can build a prefilled form. I go to the address bar and add a question mark at the end of the string to tell the form, here is where I'll add my own field details. This is the format. I'll write prefill underscore field name. equals to whatever you want to fill into this field. Let's type in a random ID for now and let's hit enter. You can see that the form now already has a value filled in. Similarly, if I want to add one more pre-filled value, here is how I'll go. I'll add ampersand, then in the same way fill the other field value, and if you have to add a text that has a space, then you need to do an URL encoding of the space character, which is %20, that needs to be added in the place of a space, otherwise it will break the URL. And this is now ready to be used as our pre-filled URL containing two values already. Actually, I would also like to hide the pre-filled record ID. So the format for that is, I'll just add the string at the end, which would be, instead of adding the keyword prefill, you have to add the keyword hide underscore field name equals to true. So I'll add hide underscore record ID equals to true. Now using this URL, I'll go to the enrollment table and create a formula that builds this URL for me in this exact format. Here I create a formula field. Use this formula called concatenation and I'll add the string. Then to insert the record ID, I create a space in between. And in here I'll call another field, which will be a formula field that retrieves the record ID of the current record. Then I use that field for record ID. And then for name, which I will use the full name here, will normally would have a space character in between the first name and the last name. So I'll enclose the field, the full name field, in another formula called URL encoder that inserts the encoded characters wherever needed, and in this case that is a space. When the URL gets constructed using this formula, each link will then open up the respective program's personalized URL. If I click on client 1's URL, it will show us the form pre-filled with client 1's enrollment details, and so on for each of the other clients' enrollment records. Okay, this is good so far, but when we use this link to submit our measurements, this will not automatically link this record to the relevant program. We have to set up an automation that triggers on submission of this form and then use the automation to find the enrollment record and then link them. Let's go ahead and do that. Go to the automation tab here. This can be done by the trigger when the form is submitted. When the form is submitted, we need to find the record from the enrollment table whose record ID is the same as what we just received in the record ID field with this form submission. I'll use the find record action here. I'll find the record from enrollment table using the condition to get the record where the record ID matches the ID submitted by the form's record ID field. To test its working, I need to have a record already in this table. So I'll have added that manually. We found the record. In the next step, I'll be updating the record. Which record? It's the measurements table record. It needs the record ID of the record that we want to update on this table, which happens to be the record ID of the entry that just got submitted by the form, triggering this action. To make the connection, we need to update its field value called enrollment, whose record ID we have just recovered using the previous find step. So basically, I'm telling the automation to update the body measurement tracker where the record is the one that triggered it, and update its field by the name enrollment and add the record ID value submitted with that form into the field. If we did everything correctly, we can do a preview of these steps from an existing record and see how it is working. It's just a preview and it's not creating an action at this moment, so the connection will not get established. But now it seems that we have done it correctly, so let's test it. Let's see the form action and grid view on a side-by-side window. add the form details and show how connection gets created by the automation on its own. If I check the automation logs as well, it also shows just right now this automation was run. If you're getting value so far, be sure to hit that like button so I know I'm being helpful. Until this step, we got the clients to submit their measurements. Then we saw how personalized URLs can be created for each of these client enrollments, and then using that formula, we submit this form containing some of the hidden pre-filled values specific to them. So the automation can take care of connecting these entries to their respective enrollment. But how does each client receive their enrollment specific URLs that they can use to fill up their body measurements? Do we have to send to each of them separately? No. We can send them their personalized URLs using another automation to their email IDs. So let's see how we can do that. In this case, for the sake of simplicity, I have added client email ID and the name as fields within the enrollment table. But in real life scenario, each client can come for multiple enrollments. So there will be separate table for clients, and this enrollment table should be linked to that table in one-to-many relationship. That is, one client can be linked to multiple enrollments, and then each of those enrollments get linked to their respective measurement records in one-to-many relationship again. But for this example, we have client personal details within this enrollment table. So name, emails, program details are all going to be within this table. Let's create an automation that triggers when a new client enrollment takes place. So let's create a form real quick. And add a client enrollment. Then I move to automation to send this newly enrolled client the details about their enrollment and everything else they need to know and do during their program duration, which would include the task for entering their body measurements each week. And this email is where I will add their personalized URLs for body measurement form, which they will be using to send their measurements each week to the Airtable database. I'll pick the trigger when the record matches condition. Reason being, in some cases we might need to create a record from the backend or a form. Then in either cases, this condition will have to be met. In the previous case, nobody is gonna enter their measurements through any other means. So form submission happens to be the only reasonable trigger. But for this case, this trigger works best. Going ahead with the automation, I pick up the trigger when the conditions are met or when the record matches condition. The conditions to be checked will be when a record enters a view. I have selected a view which has a filter that has only those records where the payment date is within the past 1 day, that when a newly added enrollment will enter this view. In the next step, I'll add the enrollment details and the next action items that the client needs to understand regarding their enrollment. So I'll go like dear first name, then add the details about their enrollments and welcome to the program, then add a placeholder for the program name they enrolled into. Some more details goes here. I'll also add that they need to send their body measurements every week to the coach using the tracker link. And here is where I will add the personalized URL as a hyperlink into the email body. Let's go ahead and test it. I'll add a new client enrollment and then the automation will kick off. And I'll receive an email on my own email ID, which is what I have entered for this email ID field. And as I expected, I have received this email along with a personalized tracker link that I need to use to send my body measurements as a client on my expected frequency instructed by the coach in the email. Let's go ahead and add a couple of more entries. Everything looks perfect and your system to collect the body measurement is ready to use. I'll do one last thing for now. As we receive these body measurements in our database submitted by the clients, we also need a dedicated place to view them in order to track their progress over time. So I'll create a view to view these numbers and group the records by each enrollment. I can also create a shared link for the coach to view this grid when she has to take a note of how each of their client is killing it on their fitness goals. I also plan to make a video on how I created this interface using the data from the same table, the body measurement tracker, where instead of looking at these individual numbers to analyze the progress rate, we can look at the charts instead to assess how each person is doing in their fitness journey. So make sure that you're subscribed and have the bell icon pressed so that you get a notification whenever I upload my next video on how I create an interface from this tracker. I'll leave a link in the description where you can connect with me for your development needs and also check out some free downloads, and feel free to connect with me on other social media channels where I'm active on most days. This was Snigdha here. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.